Hey folks, happy Saturday and welcome to another episode of Plan A Conversations. Listen folks, we are in season 10 and it's been such a plethora of amazing conversations. I have had one of the greatest experiences of my life being able to serve you as a host, as somebody who's bringing on very interesting people who are trying to live more purposefully in all their lives and who have supported you in that as well. And as we kick off season 10, I have some exciting and also some bittersweet news that I want to share with you all beginning right now and before we kick off this season. I have decided after much prayer and conversation that this will be the last season of Plan A Conversations. And I say that because I realized through my prayer meditations that I have said all that I can say in this platform. I have interviewed people from different persuasions and different experiences and occupations who have all come and supported you in living more purposefully in your life. And I realized that this platform is now complete and it's time for me to transition to another platform. The great thing about this, as you all know, we have 10 seasons of robust conversations, and the platform will stay as it is. It's evergreen content, and there's things from death and dying, systemic racism, to women's empowerment, to LGBTQIA rights. I mean, anything that you are thinking of that is something that has been a disharmony and not allowed you to live more purposefully in this world, there is a podcast episode for you for that. And so, again, the podcast will live on and it'll be archived. And anything that you need, this is a really great platform for that. And so, I want to thank you for being with me for 10 seasons. And we're just getting started. We have an incredible, robust platform and guests. Repertoire that's coming out to you all. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and do what we do and get started. I'm so excited for today's conversation. One of my really good friends and colleagues, Crystal Berger, who is a chief media architect, a genius behind innovation and what it means to be represented throughout media for all walks of life, but especially people of color, brought to you the guests who you are seeing on your screen. And for our listeners, the voice you are about to hear, I want to introduce and welcome Dr. Cleo Manago to today's show.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
No, thank you for being here. Dr. Manago, I would love for you to just level set this conversation without my words, but how do you describe your call and purpose in the world? What is the work that you do?
Always attempt to make that simple. But my practice is based in behavioral health and cultural anthropology. My focus with those tools is on Black self-conceptual repair, mental health and well-being, and building bridges between people, including between Black people, diverse Black people along the lines of gender, ethnicity, culture, experience, background, point of view, and human sexuality, etc. Because there's been a lot of splits between us because of the dysfunctional ways we have been trained to survive in this country, and we've been prioritizing surviving instead of repair. So my work is centered around repair and what I call breaking the white supremacy trauma trance that Black people are in.
Wow. What led you to this work? How did you get involved in this? Like, it's definitely seemed like there was a download of some sort. How did you get involved in this work?
Well, the first container for the work was my life experience. As a young child, I was very sensitive and observant and very analytical. That I just I came to the earth hardwired that way. I did not choose to be this way. And I was in a family that provided a lot of data, dysfunctional data, frankly. And a lot of things as a baby, I would go, why? That don't make no sense. And I didn't get any answers when I asked why, because a lot of the dysfunction was generational. It's kind of like eating bad foods because grandmama had it, but she had her foot cut off because of diabetes, and we still eating that same stuff. You know, these are not intentional dysfunctions. These are intergenerational cultural inheritances that we're not trained to critically analyze. But I couldn't help myself. I was like, this don't make no sense. Well, getting to the point when I was in 11th grade, I discovered psychology, that was a phenomena and what it meant and what it described. And I said, okay, this, given all the craziness, which I didn't know was really called crazy until I got to that age, I said, this might be the platform in which I could actually engage the issues in my family, in my community, in society, that I thought were problematic, and based on what I've learned to call trauma and a lack of well-being, or dis-ease, DIS hyphen ease. And simultaneously to that, my escape hatch as a baby, meaning first grade, etc., was music. I got into a music class in elementary school and became a cellist, and then an electric bassist, and went on tour as a touring bassist and musician. And I got torn between, well, to get to that point, the famous people that I met, including the black people, were struggling with some of the same stuff that my dysfunctional family and dysfunctions in my community were facing. And I want to make it clear, not everybody in the community was dysfunctional, but a meaningful number was, a noticeable number was. And the same dysfunctions and anti-black phenomena that I saw in my community, I saw among people who were famous and rich and black. I said, okay, you need to make a decision and go one way or the other, because it's difficult to do both. And I decided, and that's another story that's pretty long in terms of how I made that decision, but I made my vocation community mental health, and cultural anthropology with focus on the African diaspora.
And I love that cultural anthropology piece. And so many people would not understand how that is indicative of the work that you're doing and how important that is. How has that cultural anthropology piece round out your work? Because I think a lot of people don't understand that significance. And I would love for you to break that down for us.
Well, human beings are steeped in culture. All human beings are steeped in cultural norms, as I mentioned, generational habits, practices, traditions. And the Black community has been worldwide, has been particularly interrupted when it comes to indigenous culture, self-knowing, self-concept. It's been contaminated with whiteness and white frames of reference and white abuses and brutality and insanity. And again, we're going into generations of the trauma from that experience that's been unresolved. I mean, to an extent, we've learned to adapt, to quote, get along, to get along, and we haven't attended to ourselves. One of the metaphors that I use to make my point, and this is still connected to culture, there's a film that you may have seen called The Help. And in The Help, a lot occurs. And one of the things that's powerful to me is when the Black women tenderly love the white babies, and then by the time they get home, they're exhausted. They throw in their maid suits on the couch, and they have babies too who want their mommy, and she's too tired. And she has not really reflected on this because she's too busy surviving. So the culture is one where we've learned to not attend to each other and make each other our priority, but make whiteness priority. You've seen grown Black people whisper the word white. Dad, my job, there was this white woman that this. You've seen that before, haven't you?
Yes,
And
yes.
sometimes everybody's Black. It's like, who are you whispering for? Well, unfortunately, that's a rhetorical question. There's a white person in here too that's rent free, and I'm into getting them evicted. So culture is really what human beings do, but in our instance, it's been interrupted.
Yeah, it's been interrupted. And like you're saying, Dr. Monago, that whole sense of trauma that so many of us are living with have no idea that this is the impetus and the intention for how we live, how we make our decisions, how we don't make decisions, and how we treat each other. Break
Yes.
down for us that methodology about what trauma has been in your work and how you see it living out in our lives.
Well, as mentioned before, from my perspective, we are in a trance. It's difficult to be clear and walking on psychological solid ground when you're living in a society that's literally against your power, against your self love, because without getting to all of that, we're envied. We are the swagger. We are the magic. We are the music. We are the rhythm. We are the ones who come in the room and things change in a good spiritual way. But while being organically connected to that melanated norm, we have a society that's defying our beauty and got us calling each other the N words and got us doing skin color and closer and farther from white and calling each other that word, which I'd already said. And all these things are constantly battling with our psyche. So as a result of it not being resolved as a phenomena or broken down, deconstructed, and crystallized, we go into a trauma trance. For example, there was a film that came out some years ago called Sybil. You might be too young to know about that. But Sybil is a film about a little girl who was being raped by her guardians. And she was being raped every single day. And her survival tactic was to go into her body. And she was one of the people that were the original focuses on what's called multiple personalities. Because how she survived was that she left her body and went other places during the trauma. With us, a lot of Black people are doing the same thing. A lot of us are not really in our bodies because we've been made to think it's not a safe place to be. So we go into all over the place. I mean, this is going to offend people, but Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, one of my heroines, mentioned before she passed, she said, if Black people found a pill that could make them white, many of them would take the pill. One of the facts that breaks that down as a great possibility is that from 1939 until 2021, there's been professionals who have conducted the doll test, where there's a white doll and a Black doll. And from 1939 to 2021, most of the Black children choose the white doll. So you can't help but to be in a trance when you're in a world that defies your humanity and greatness and your self-conceptual comfort on a daily basis. And instead of having leaders in your community that say, wait a minute, let's deconstruct and resolve this. Let's focus on the fact that there's Dante in San Diego and Lorante in Washington, D.C., who are doing some of the same dysfunctions and they don't even know each other because it's systemic. So let's back up and go, wait a minute, let's fix this. Nope. Instead of doing that, and there are people doing that, including myself, but we don't get Oprah Winfrey level coverage. Only the people that white people like get that kind of coverage. And just like, I don't mean to be controversial, I'm just telling you how it is. It's not a coincidence that the first person being considered for the Supreme Court and the vice president and the person who's already in the Supreme Court all have white partners. People are chosen by white people, this time Biden in the most recent years, who they're comfortable with. It's not about our comfort. It's not about what affirms Black people, what affirms Black love, what affirms Black nurturance, self-conceptual health, and well-being. It's about let's get some Black people that we know love white people to be in these positions to give the appearance of Black progress while we realize that this is white love in Black face.
Because from your perspective, that then would make them feel comfortable rather than dealing with a lot of the atrocities that Black people are experiencing every day.
Well, that's one way of putting it. The way I put it is that if more Black people were not loyal to Blackness, white people's power that they're in is less threatened.
Okay, so let's break that down. What exactly do you mean when you say that? Like, what would that look like?
If Black people have a love affair with white people and tend to prefer white people as their life partners or who they value most profoundly in their lives as a system, that's why I mentioned three people. And I can go to CNN, all three men who there are on that show, on that station, all three men are in the same love or romantic condition as the other people. If they have white in-laws and white people who are profoundly connected to them, they think twice in many cases around being loyal to Black specific issues and Black people as a focus. And white systems level people and decision makers understand that. Now, they didn't always understand that. I mean, one of the reasons why white people could remain in control is because they pivot and change their strategy when they have to. Like, for example, if you watch television today, which I'm sure you've seen, there's a disproportionate number of biracial relationships that outnumber Black relationships by a long shot. Have you seen that?
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
Well, that means that white supremacy has pivoted. It's like, wait a minute. We used to not want this to happen, but this is to our benefit given our lack of reproduction capacity. and you can find everything I'm saying. I mean, I suggest to your listeners and to you too, research, for example, the reproduction challenge that white people are having in the Midwest and different parts of this country, along with suicide and all kinds of things that is interrupting the production of white people. They have to pivot to do something to make sure they stay in control. And one of the ways they can keep control is to make sure they have less challengers. And black people who love them are less of a challenge.
Wow, because they're less of a challenge because they're not going to be calling out the actual injustices and the systemic racism that is perpetuating
And
Black society.
they love them. But the other thing I want to say too, before people's resistant gears come into place, I'm not saying this is true for all interracialists, all people, but enough, a critical mass, enough is enough to do what I'm talking about.
And Dr. Manago, I really appreciate the critical thinking about this and then the different systems that are at play from your vantage point into how white supremacy stays and perpetuate our society. Why do you think there is this shift and that is happening year after year, day after day, to how do we get into the psyche of understanding how white supremacy is being evolved? Like there's an evolution to it, it seems.
Hmm. Well, first of all, we have to, my suggestion, and this is what I do, is I never say the term white supremacy in most instances without adding the word myth or mythology. White
Oh,
supremacy
good.
mythology, because it's a complete myth in all ways that they are superior to anybody, including, in my opinion, particularly us. So
Mhm.
it's a myth. And we have to not stabilize the term by just saying white supremacy because it implies on a subconscious basis, let alone on a conscious basis, that white is supreme, and it's not.
That's good.
One of the reasons why there's so much mythology, for example, you know that critical race theory is being whiteballed from most educational institutions, while
Right.
LGBTQ is being instituted from the kindergarten and up. That's happening in New Jersey, near where you are, and all kinds of places. But critical race theory, on the other hand, no.
Hmm.
And what's relevant to that, regardless of how you may identify sexually, how I identify sexually, is that these are white people doing this policy work, not black
Hmm.
people. These are white people pushing an agenda that they want to see happen. If they were really as decent as they act like, they would also be on the side of the critical race theory, being put into the schools, but they're not, because that defies them too. They're also white, regardless of their sexuality, if I'm being clear here.
Hmm.
But the point I'm trying to make again is that white supremacy is a very active defensive phenomenon because it's built on a house of cards. For
Hmm.
example, United States of America, if you look at the census and you get to the Egyptians, they are told to identify in the census as white.
Hmm.
Well, have you been to Egypt or what's really called Kemet? Have you been?
No.
Well, I have. All you got to do is go to the Valley of the Kings or Queens and see the people on the walls who were there, who were people who knew them in person, drew these, and they make some of them make you and I both look light skinned. They're so dark.
Right. Right.
But Tom Cruise is the star of the Egyptian films in the United States, and so I'm saying this in terms of all the decoding that we have to do to make it less scathed by the myth of white supremacy and anti-blackness. We have to learn how to decodify all these clear myths and mythologies and resistance to things like critical race theory because they want to keep us in the trance. If
Hmm.
we stay in the trance, we're still pliable, movable, manipulatable, sit up to slap each other. That's a whole nother, you know, all kinds of stuff that nobody else does but us because we're unresolved. And you
Hmm.
don't understand what I mean by unresolved?
Break that down because I don't think our people who are listening are going to understand what that means.
Okay. Probably for giggling. I'm laughing
The-
at your
this
laugh.
is good.
Unresolved goes back to what I said earlier is that we have not had support on a macro level to step out of the white supremacy norms and resolve its impact on our self concept. What's leading Black children to choose the white doll, for almost 100 years. Instead of stopping in our tracks and saying, let's resolve this, and using these scientific data as a forecast instead of as a normal symptom that we're just going to deal with, but as a forecast that we should resolve, we're trained to go on to other things, move on to other issues, and not resolve that issue. So we're unresolved. And, I mean, we call ourselves, I'm going to use the word now for dramatic purposes. I don't use it in my own life, but we call ourselves niggas, for God's sake. That literally came from 200 years of a dehumanizing factory on Black people's psyche. And we still do it because we're unresolved. No group, including Jews, all white ethnicities, even African people, Asian, etc., keeps a insult from a abusive oppressor and claims they're reclaiming it. Why would you reclaim? If I called you a stupid MF, which is an insult, you would go, let me reclaim that and make some T-shirts and a movement. No, you would go, that's crazy. I deject that. Well, when you don't know the difference between an insult and what's positive because you're in a trance, you don't resolve anything. The other day, and this has happened many times, I was in a store and I saw a mother refer to a little boy that was on her nerves, and told him if he didn't stop acting a certain way, she's going to beat the black off of him. And she called him a little N-word. Now, don't act like you've never seen this before in your life.
Oh, definitely. I'm from Detroit.
This is unresolved stuff.
Yeah,
that's 100%. Not helpful. And I spoke to the mother, and she didn't mean no harm, and she was in the trance, and I took her out of the trance in a loving way. One thing I think is important to do, and I hope I'm not talking too much, and you get clear, is that we cannot re-traumatize each other. No matter how much somebody gets on our last nerve, we can't go back into some type of abrasive, hurtful, abusive, traumatizing stance to call ourselves doing something about it. So I didn't confront her in an abusive way. Did my best to be I'm already a 6 feet tall, dark-skinned man, so that's scary to some people in their subconscious anyway because of how well we've been trained. But anyway, to make a long story short, I talked to her about it and lovingly and respectfully, and asked her through some very specific strategies to consider not doing that, because I know you love your child, and right now you're making them think they're disposable, and that their skin, if you're going to beat the black off of them, that means that it can be removed and that it should be removed. Don't say that. So I was interrupting the trance.
And so for you and listeners especially who really need to hear this, interrupting in the trance begins in what kind of strategy? Is it rooted in love? Like what exactly is the steps that we need to take?
Well, I don't like to sound esoteric, but it's your fault. It has to be rooted in love. I almost got emotional just now. I don't want to go there. It has to be rooted in love. And Black love on a fundamental basis is also interrupted. Not just love between each other, but platonic love between each other, but including romantic love. I mean, right now, if you did a laundry list in terms of pop culture in most media, finding a reliable love story that's not a comedy on the pop culture screen, you have to get your magnifying glass out and really think, because we're not seeing Black people loving each other as a norm in the landscape of our consciousness and imagination through media. That's relevant. It's your fault I went there, because love is important. You cannot be an asset to Black people if you don't love yourself and love Black people. So I want to say that first. And that is something that's really informs my strategies, is that I really care about who I'm talking to. And I understand why we do what we do, including stuff that some people consider dumb, ignorant, or ignorant, to get to the juice of it stuff. I get it. So instead of judging and being abusive and pointing my finger, my posture is caring. No matter how much I get on my last toenail nerve, I still have trained myself to keep my body language caring and at least neutral and not judgmental. And then we get into the strategies, which I only can tease you about, because to talk about them in detail requires that people go to my course, my Critical Thinking and Culture Affirmation course, where we spend 6 modules breaking down all kinds of stuff from a media level historical level, psychological level, cultural level, didactic level, critical thinking level, about a bunch of things that we do as strategies in the CTCA model to get Black people to be permanently out of the trance and learn to be assets behaviorally and even impulsively and subconsciously to Black repair, self-love, and self-conceptual health. So it is a bunch of strategies. Some of them I've mentioned to you in passing in how we've been talking, but to get all the details, because I can't do justice in the amount of time we have to talk, all that it involves. But it does start off with love. It starts off with creating a canvas for triggering people into coming out of the trance, if not temporarily, permanently when we get finished with them. But the bottom line is, in terms of looking at this in contrast, if you give someone, and you've done this before in your life, someone that you know and love, really good advice that's literally life-saving, and they don't take it or transform, is because you've only been speaking to their intellect and not to their behavior and their internalized life. You have to help them to reform and get the baggage out of their internalized life so they can feel valuable enough to take your advice that's good for them. And that's what the CTCA model does. It breaks people out of the trance and then gives them information to work with while they're outside of the trance. So they're in the trance. It's kind of like a domestic violence situation. We all know brilliant, beautiful, highly intelligent people who are in abusive relationships. And we go, why are they going back to that black eye? Well, the person who they go back to has successfully fed into the illusion of their smallness, of their irrelevance, of their powerlessness. And you can be brilliant intellectually, but emotionally crushed because of things that were not resolved, and wind up being intellectually brilliant, but abused at home because you still haven't worked out the unconscious anti-self or anti-blackness or anti-womenness or anti-feminineness, which can go across gender. Because even in same-gender loving relationships, you've heard of this, I'm sure, where there's a more quote unquote feminine person who's being brutalized by the person who has a great male act going, masculinity act, because often it's an act. It's not a natural way of being. This is a compensatory public performance to make them feel like they're not man enough. And that's a whole nother conversation, but it's relevant.
It is. It is. So, Dr. Manago, how does one then, after going through these different steps, how does one know that they're outside of the trance? Because I don't even know if many people would even know what that would look like or feel like, especially Black people.
Well, I'm going to try to, that's a very complex question, but I'm going to try to use a metaphor. Have you ever been to somebody's house, maybe your own house, I don't know, and you didn't know that it was stinking until you walked outside and walked back in? Well, or you brought your friend outside and said, come outside. Now let's go back inside. Do you smell what I'm smelling? They go, damn. Well, that's Black people in the white supremacy stink society. Well, we don't know it's stinking. So your question in terms of how do you know you're in a trance, it's like, how do you know your house stinks if you've never been outside of it? So my work is to help people get the clarity and break the trance long enough for them to come out of it, and then enter back into where they were and go, oh shit, excuse me, oh shoot, I forgot I'm on.
It's all good.
Oh shoot, so it's really an oh shoot strategy, if you will. But getting back to your question, people don't know. I mean, anti-blackness is so normal all over the United States, all over. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the high-profile slapping between Will Smith and Chris Rock. Well, as I said on the talk show I was on the other day, there's lots of Black people practicing misdirected rage on Black people. What do you think so-called gang violence is? There's a lot of inadvertent violence with a Black target between Black people happening all the time. Now, it rarely happens on that level, but like I've always been saying so far, this Will Smith and Chris Rock are 100% human beings having a Black experience in a white supremacist phenomena. They just can afford to do more stuff with their neurosis financially. than most others. But they're struggling no less. They're no less traumatized and confused and trying to adapt to white supremacy mythology and masculinity mythology. Oh, they're no matter of fact, in some instances, and we saw with our own eyes, there's a hyper concern when you are somebody like Will Smith, whose manhood has been in question all of his career.
Right.
He's corny and not cool, and who has been told recently that Jada's doing so and so and so and so with her life, which means there's more evidence that you ain't no man. And then he's on this stage at the Oscars or in this large phenomena where he still walks in there before the Oscars with this manhood concern. And now we're on a national stage and somebody makes him have to prove that he's a man with his wife being so-called assaulted. This is the Black experience. So people don't know. Like, I'm sure that what Will Smith did was not planned. And I've talked to boys or young men who are involved in gang violence who have been um, killing or hurting other Black men. They're acting out. They're totally on automatic pilot and anti-Black, N-word driven, white love bullcrap. And they are not thinking about anything. They're just doing. And nobody, this is what I told you earlier when I mentioned when I was a musician and I ran into people who will remain unnamed, who were very famous. And I thought they had a charmed life. And maybe they had advanced outside of the toxicity because they saw the world. No, trance-breaking is a deliberate phenomenon that people are lucky enough to run into, or they run into me somehow, or my workshops, and they get a chance to do some work that they never even knew they needed to do. And so it's something that if we don't become deliberate and clear about needing to be done in terms of resolving the unresolved anti-Black patterns and pathologies, we don't resolve them.
Yeah. And it's so interesting you say that, Dr. Manago, because I was just looking at the media coverage about the Will Smith, Chris Rock, and the number one word that was in almost every headline was traumatic. How traumatized the world was by this, and how this has caused people to not be able to sleep, how kids have not been able to process they're eating lunch. I mean, all these different things. And to your point about the media piece of it, I was just really not surprised, but left completely for a loss of words how traumatic this experience was for all these people and the different things that are happening in the world at large with war and all these different pedophilia from white men and white women. None of that is ever described as being traumatic or traumatizing because literally just waking up this morning, I was just on Twitter looking at a friend's page and I'm like, are we still talking about this traumatic event?
Well, let me preface my response to that with I have not seen the slap. Just like I have not seen the murder of George Floyd. And in terms of the video footage, because I've seen a lot, I've been an active observer of Black attack being both on Black people and in between Black people, and I don't need to see that. It's because it's too painful, and the pain could be interruptive to my capacity to do what I do and continue to go on. So I don't wallow in these painful things. So I've not seen that. But I will say that you're right. Um, and the media does control what we care about. It does not talk about Ukraine, etc., pedophilia with the same level of zest and focus. So they're the ones controlling the narrative. But I think it's important to break down the different reasons why people are so called traumatized by this highly discussed phenomena. I think part of that trauma among Black people is confusion and embarrassment and shock because both Chris Rock and Will Smith have been considered, the cream of the crop in terms of public and Hollywood success. They weren't particularly responsive to Black issues in real terms. They weren't really in the front and using their popularity to try to change things in explicit ways. Everything was kind of passive or subliminal because we're afraid of white backlash and white disapproval. So we're not always direct when we need to be powerful and stand up as another issue. But these two people who are who are white enough for TV were in a violent interaction, and it was shocking to black folks. And white people, I think, are not as traumatized, but are figuring out, okay, wait a minute, now, these are two nice black men. We like them, and now one of them who we like the most is one who's acting like the one who's the darkest should be acting based on their psychotic unconscious analysis. So that's going on to them, but they'll be fine, and it'll become urban legend that goes away into the ether. But among black people, Chris Rock and Will Smith will never be seen the same. Now, Chris is being considered kind of a hero-ish because he didn't respond violently, and he's considered the victim. And you may have heard, at least I've heard, that his live concerts have gone up in price tenfold.
Yes.
And he was in a lurch previously. People were not filling the seats, and now he's the nice black guy between the two black guys because he was hit and not hitting. It's crazy. But even then, most of those people buying those tickets are white folks because Chris Rock was never really like Chappelle or somebody like that who has a really large black audience who goes to see him for a tap into some social change considerations on behalf of black people. That's not Chris Rock. So the trauma that we're supposedly hearing about is for different reasons for different people. I want to make that clear. And again, I want to reiterate that we're not controlling the narrative because there's some more in-depth analysis like what I'm giving that will not make ABC or CNN, etc., because white people are not interested in black people coming out of the trance.
And speaking of the trance as it relates to this, I cannot tell you how many text messages I received from friends who said, this has set the black race back.
Back from where? From the front?
Exactly.
I mean, black from what?
Right.
And see, that's why I keep talking. That's why I started off my rant with that Chris and Will were considered white enough for Hollywood. And now they may be in trouble, particularly Will. So now we're going to be set back. But see, that's a very problematic, powerless state of mind because we can do anything.
Yes.
Black people can do anything.
Yes,
and particularly this late day, we have the technology, the brilliance, the capacity, the positioning. If we become the spook who's set by the door instead of becoming another spook for white folks. But anyway, we have a lot of capacity, but we're still in that mythological powerlessness myth of we can't do it if white people don't let us do it. So because when you say we've been pushed back, it ain't by us. We're worried about them pushing us back. And it's like, they can't do nothing else if we don't let them do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about a lot of people who are held bound by that myth of that powerlessness. What do you think it is? How does this then keep Black people from living out their purpose and calling in life? Is it because of this trance that we cannot aspire to live out the very best that we have within us? Like, what do you go ahead?
The simple answer is yes. I mean, I'm going to preface the answer with reiterating that we're extremely powerful. I don't use the term that some people use, white dominated, or I use the word white dominating, meaning they're actively doing a dominating act on us, but they're not dominant. Blackness and the genius and the swagger and the magic of black people is omnipresent in everything in this country, including what's best about it in music and science and everything. So we're present. We're not dominated out of existence. However, psychologically, we've been trained that we're not powerless and we need to be codependent to whiteness until we die as a people. And we're not powerless. We're very, very powerful. But getting back to your question, yes, we don't believe that or realize that is because of the trance. I mean, even the Oscars and everything that we're watching on TV is part of a white vision. Even in Black Panther. Now you saw Black Panther. Was you one of those people under a rock? Okay, anyway, even in Black Panther, because white people are slick, they had the CIA being part of the hero group to the Wakandans. The white guy was in the CIA, in case you wonder
I
what.
remember that. Yes.
Now, that is so offensive historically. That's the equivalent of having a Jewish celebration film with a Nazi being in the middle of it, driving a spaceship to help the Jews kill their oppressor. The CIA helped to destroy Malcolm, Mark, I mean, everybody. So they could have gave it Wakanda was fictitious. I couldn't even call it the AIC. You know what I'm saying, or give it a fictitious name. It was called the CIA in the film because whiteness has to co-sign it, and Disney had to pay for it, and they have to find themselves in it. I say all this rant to say that we do not understand our power and our capacity because we're getting a perpetual narrative that throws us off track and that interrupts our capacity to simply be awake. So, for us to actually realize our powerfulness, we have to look at media as entertainment, not as an educator.
Right.
And a
Right.
lot of us come from homes where the TV was our babysitter. You know, our mother or father or whoever was doing what they're doing, and to get us off their nerves and out of their hair, or they tried to do other things, they put us in front of the television. Well, that's fine if the baby has a critical analysis. It's going, okay, I see that racism. I notice that there's no black love stories. I know that's wrong. It's not me that's wrong. It's the television that's wrong. Well, most black parents don't tell their children that. So they're watching it, and it's all coming in. All the myths of their worthlessness. The Tom Cruises from Egypt, and the lack of a love story. There's a narrative of anti-blackness that they're internalizing.
Right.
Then they wind up slapping each other. I'm almost joking, but the point I'm making is that we we implode, and we're always in tick tick boom mode. You've seen people, particularly black people, who go from eating a sandwich to about to go off. You've seen that
Right.
because
Of course.
we're in perpetual tick tick boom mode because we're unresolved, and we cannot become resolved until we have a critical analysis. And that's why I gave you the example of children watching TV. And I know what I'm saying from actual research that I've done. We have a program called Watu Wajua, which means Children of the Sun in Swahili. That's for children. And we teach black children critical thinking and culture affirmation. And again, to explain that is so dimensional, we don't have time. But the bottom line is when we get finished with them, when they watch television, they're watching with a critical eye now. They're seeing the imbalances. They're seeing the biracial disproportionate representation. They're seeing it all and they're going, okay, I see it. I'm not internalizing it. I understand that I'm watching a corrupt phenomena in terms of how it treats black people called entertainment, and I'm going to be entertained by it, but I know that Superman doesn't exist. I know that this is entertainment and that it's biased entertainment. Because if it was not biased, I would see myself loving myself. And I better turn on TV and on every channel, like I see white folks and biracial people, and see black people loving themselves or doing something positive with each other all the time. But I can't hardly find that. That's not because I'm bad. It's because we live in a system that has a corrupt human phenomena called white supremacy mythology that I need to learn how to navigate past and not be contaminated by it. We teach children this and they get it. And I'm using quick and fast terms, but I don't talk like this with the children. I want to be clear. They bring magazines, they bring TV shows that they like and all kinds of things that they like, and we ask them to evaluate them and ask them, where are you in this stuff? Have you ever thought about where you are in this stuff? And most of them no, they haven't thought about it, but it's affecting them. Can I give you one more short story to make
Please,
my
please, please take your time. This is critical information.
okay? Because I don't want to be assuming I could be here forever. During the what was that person's name who shot 12 people and murdered 9? I forgot his name. I talk about him so much, I can't believe I forgot his name. There was a young white boy, and you know about this incident, who shot at the Emmanuel Church. He
Oh,
shot 12
South
people,
Carolina.
and 9 of them died.
Yes.
Dylan Roof. During the Dylan Roof event, I happened to be traveling across the country to speak at mental health conferences. And when I got to St. Paul, Minneapolis, I was speaking. I was a keynote speaker, and I was speaking to maybe 1,000 people, predominantly Black people, and many of them had their children with them. It was a weekend, and I asked the parents. I said, "Can I ask your children something?" Now, this was well into my talk, maybe 20 minutes into the talk. It didn't start off like this, so there was a comfort level with me with the audience, and I asked the parents. I said, "Can I ask your children something? I promise you that it won't be something that's problematic or that's going to be inappropriate, but I still want you to let me have permission to ask your children a question that I'm going to ask them about a topical issue." And the majority of them said yes. So I asked the children, who probably were babies up until 15, 16, I said, "Do you know raise your hand if you know who Dylan Roof is?" The majority of the children who were 5 years old up knew who Dylan Roof was, because you got to remember, a lot of us are thrown in front of the TV, and Dylan Roof was all over the TV at that time. I said, "How many of you did your mommy and daddy sit you down to talk about that situation and how it impacted you or how it made you feel?" Now, something occurred that I know why it occurs, and it's occurred every time I've done a similar exercise, but little boys started sniffling and crying more than the girls, because a lot of Black boys are living with unresolved, unexplained trauma from police brutality footage, from all kinds of stuff that's targeting them in particular, or Black males, that they don't get invitations in their families or nowhere to say, how does it make me feel? So they're living this, again, the tick, tick, boom sit up going on here. And to get to the point, I asked the parents, how many of you, and the majority of them had not talked to their kids. And it's not because they don't love them. Just like the woman in the store who told her little boy she's going to beat the black off of them. This is not an issue of not loving them. This is an issue of intergenerational anti-Black acculturated norms of surviving more than thriving and engaging, because we came from a people that engaging was dangerous. Caring about Black people could get you killed. And it did get Malcolm killed and Fannie Lou Hamer beat up, and had Harriet Tubman running thousands of miles from one place to another. There's been consequences. So our DNA, it's in us, but we have not been given ourselves permission on all levels to come out of the trauma trance, into full actualization of being a human being that happens to be called Black in the contemporary story, because we weren't always Black. We used to just be African. That's a whole nother thing. Africa, in most parts of Africa, they don't call themselves Black. Right. That's a white supremacy audience phenomena. So all of the stuff that we are going through is completely resolvable, all totally resolvable, but it won't be executed until more people hear what I'm talking about.
Right. What do you say to people who say this is a flat out economic issue when it comes to Black people moving out of this trance? What do you say to folks who say this is about money and equity and it's not about self actualization, self love?
Well, I asked them first. First thing that I ask people to do who say anything to me, and again, I try to keep my composure and try to stay chill, is please explain what you're saying. And they'll say stuff like, because I've already heard what you just said before. Well, so and so has all kinds of money. I said, we've established that. I'm trying to figure out what you're saying, that it's all about money and not about race. What do you mean? Right. Well, so and so was paid. I said, again, I know that part. You've already made that your baseline of your perspective. But why are you saying this? But people keep talking about race. People keep saying everything's about race. I said, okay, but I'm asking you, since it concerns you, to explain to me why it's not about race and why it's just about money. And they become silent. They start going into almost a catatonic stage of paralysis because they can't explain themselves. And I'll keep my composure and I'll say, well, I believe, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that to deal with just how much damage race has done to us is difficult to you because part of you does not want to offend white people. And you have been trained to be more concerned about offending white people than engaging the reality of the symptoms of white supremacy mythology on black people. Because if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't even have to have this conversation.
Right.
But the reason we even have this conversation is because you want to defy the idea of race being a problem. But what I want you to do is give me an example, and let's use high profile people because everybody knows who they are before we
Right,
get
right, right.
into name a black affirming, black comfort, self-conceptually healthy or comfortable person who's rich and famous, who you can look at them and tell that they have positive affinity to blackness and black people. I'm listening. Where they at? So one time, one person, well, this happened more than one time, but this shows you how deep the trance is. Particularly when he was alive, some people say, well, Michael Jackson. I say, now, wait a minute, you've really reached in desperate. You go a black man who trying to look white, who went out and bought some white children, who don't got a drop of black blood in them, and who dyed the baby of the children's hair blonde, and it was a baby. That's your example of money not having anything to do with race. Michael Jackson's whole aesthetic is a reaction to race. The whole thing. So what do you mean? Well, his father did that. I said, okay, well then what happened to the rest of the family who all got a nose job too? What that got to do with him whitening himself? Well, he had vitiligo. Well, emphasis on vitiligo, but it's LIE in this instance, vitiligo, because he did not have vitiligo. Not that naturally progressed. He induced vitiligo through bleaching cream, which you can do. Anybody can get vitiligo, which is the deterioration of God, I say this all the time, and I remember this too, of your you know what I'm saying, the deterioration of your
pigmentation.
There it is. That's what bleaching creams do. And there's some East African countries that have banned bleaching creams because there's such an epidemic over there. But when somebody tells me that topic of it's not about race, it's about money, I ask them that question: Where are the healthy black people who have a high profile, who are loving somebody black, who are clearly walking around the world with the affirmation of who they are as black people, and who could speak to it like Jews speak to being Jewish all the time? Name somebody black and with a high profile who does it, and I'm still waiting for the answer. Well, you're me and that person I'm talking. Your inability to come up with an answer proves my point.
So what would you say to people who they hear you, they it's starting to make sense for them, especially black folks, of course, to begin this process of breaking out of the trance? What would you say to them to be the first thing that they just should consider within this period of time?
Okay, I'll attempt to be brief. I am a person who triggers critical thinking in people, particularly black people, but I do this with all kinds of people. And I'll ask them questions like, do you love yourself? And then the ego always kicks and say, yes, I love myself. I said, okay, do you love yourself for being black? Well, I am black. I know I'm black. I said, okay. So what do you do with your life that's an active contribution to blackness? Well, I take my children to school. So does everybody else. I'm talking about the unique thing you do about the unique experience of blackness that affirms it as a part of your norm. And you'd be amazed that most black people don't have no real practices or rites of practices that's about the affirmation of blackness. I said we need to come up with one. If you need some help, I can give you some guidance on how to do that. The next question I ask people is name a love story that's not a comedy in popular culture. That's a reliable love story that you can go to and watch and enjoy like you do all these other white shows between white people that love each other. Name a black show, and they go, and one of the things they always go to when they get desperate is called "This Is Us" or "Just Us." What's it
Yeah,
called?
This Is Us.
This Is Us. Well, there's a beautiful black couple at This Is Us. I said, okay, well, let's stay calm, Cleo. Stay calm. I do this a lot, and I go, okay, let's think about the husband. Who created the husband? White people who created the husband. His white parents who saved him from his messed up black parents, who was one who died of an overdose and the other one who had AIDS. And this is all fiction, by the way. None of these people exist, but this is this narrative that you can't wait. You breaking speeding laws to get to your TV so you can watch this because you're so emotionally caught up in a white savior story. It's a white savior story. It re-implies that you have to have white codependence to reach the kind of wonderful black couple that this is. Now, I'll ask them after I break that down and break their little hearts, because sometimes their hearts are broken by that reality. I'll say, now, how does a white savior story serve you? Now, what I'm doing is I'm giving you examples of trance-breaking questions. And when the trances are broken and they're in this critical thought mode, then I start giving advice again about self-love, critical thinking, watching these things that are out of balance with a critical eye. But learn, and I mean, if you have to get therapy or whatever, learn to value Black people as a practice. Do things in your life that contribute to Black people's advancement. And if you can't do that, admit that you have anti-Black impulses, that you have Black dismissive impulses, that unlike the Jews and other people who are very successful on a collective basis, instead of a bunch of individuals like Will over here and Jada over there and somebody else over here, but there's a collective cultural prosperity. Why are we not investing, or why are you not investing in Black collective prosperity? And sometimes people get mad, like them M words. If things that you know that your subconscious right now knows where I'm going, it's a reality. And I stay calm. And I emphasize that on purpose because it can get in your last nerve. You can say F this. I stay calm. I go, well, let's work on why you have all these anti-Black impulses. And I ask no rhetorical questions. I don't ask rhetorical questions. I wait for an answer. Is it right? Because most of them are processing. They're like, they never thought about any of this. That they're coming out of the trance. They're coming out of the trance, and I know they're going to come out the trance. So I prepare myself in terms of strategy to work with them while they're coming out of the trance.
So first of all, we have to have a part 2 of
how you can do that when your show is going to change.
Well, we're still in season 10. We're just starting the first episode, but I cannot wait to get the responses from the feedback from this episode, because I know people are going to have so many questions to bring, to explore, to even continue this conversation. One last question. I know we're running out of time. How do you stay sane doing this work?
What's I was saying? No.
Like, how do you stay, you can tell that you're grounded, but how do you stay grounded and spiritually centered? If those are my words, but like, how do you do that doing this? Because this is centuries of.
That's a great question. I'm going to answer it. But I also want to say that I'm here for the response to your people and coming back to address it. So I want to make that clear. Not a problem. My centeredness, clarity, and comfort, and ability to stay centered is because I'm clear. See, I'm not in the trance. I'm not in it. I know about it. I lovingly address it. I'm concerned about it. My life is committed to doing something about the trance, or breaking the trance to be specific, but I'm not in it. So I see everything around me with a critical analysis that's not just subjective, but that's informed by science, data, experience, participatory research, traditional research, being born an intuitive, sensitive child who was not centered as a child. I want to make that clear. I want to make it real clear. I didn't come. I didn't. I came to this place hardwired to be inquisitive, sensitive, and observant. But I was not always centered. I had to grow up as a baby, toddler, teenager, etc., and go through that experience.
Me
But
too.
through the whole thing, I was observant though. Like what some people do, including my siblings, is they go and medicate or escape or do stuff that's going to distract them because it's too painful to face. Well, I wanted to know what the hell was going on, so I faced it. Even when I was being victimized and hurt, I was like, "What's going on here?" And even for me, it wasn't a rhetorical question. I wanted to know for real, and I know now. So I don't walk through this society or navigate through it, seeing stuff and becoming shocked. I mean, black people keep the metaphor I use about a lot of black people. It's like we're driving and we're sleepy, and then we wake up. Oh God, I got to drive, and we go back to sleep instead of staying awake and driving to our destination with clarity. We keep on going back into the trance, so we keep being really shocked. Like, could you believe they did that? Well, they just did it last week. I mean, they just did it for the same every year in the last several centuries in terms of racism, brutality, police brutality, blah 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 blah. This ain't none of it's new. What's new is this thing here that we now can record it. But there's none of it is brand new. I used to work in law enforcement, which is a whole nother issue here. But I stay grounded a bit to make a long story long because I'm not in the trance. And but not being in a trance is not enough, because it can be very painful not being in a trance because you're looking at painful stuff through 2020. So I make sure that I live a great life. I make sure that I practice self care. I make sure I love where I lay my head. I make sure that I perpetually nurture myself with nutrition and positive space. And I don't wallow in white supremacy trauma porn or anti-black porn, which the media is full of it. I mean, you cannot find in dramatic television many stories that are centered around black life that's not connected to drugs, like the show Power. It's called Power, but it's about a drug dealer. That show Empire was about a family that got rich off of drug dealing. There's a show called Chai and all this kind of stuff. It's all centered around dysfunction and white narratives that are toxic to black self concept. So I know what I'm seeing, so I don't get internalized. I don't internalize all the trauma that keeps me sleep and constantly waking up to it and going back to sleep because I can't take it. I can take it because I'm doing something with my life on a solution basis. I'm not just sitting here and wallowing. I'm actively resisting. And I always ask black people, as I mentioned earlier, what are you doing for your people? And if you're not doing anything, why not? And it's not a rhetorical question. We get into it. We dig into it. We resolve it. So to make a long story long, I'm clear. And being clear means you have to have nurturance. But one of the side effects of clarity is prosperity. You the domino effect when you know who you are. But it's still not easy because you're gonna have black people hating, you're gonna have white supremacists hating, and you're gonna have black people hating for white supremacists because that's how we've been trained. So the please don't make me get you thinking that oh God, no, it can be an uphill battle. But what I can control is how I take care of myself during the battle. And I'm an old man, but I don't look it, do I? Anyway, I am classically considered old, if you will, in the biological spectrum of things, but everything works very well. So I'll leave that to your imagination. But the point is that clarity creates space for prosperity biologically, economically, and spiritually. Because the body is like an antenna. If it's not straight, remember back in the, you might be too young to know about this. Back in the day, we had antennas on our TVs.
I remember Dr. Manago.
And sometimes something happened that broke the antenna, and we went and got hangers and oil and anything we can do to get a better perception. And nothing worked like an antenna, a pristine antenna. And the body is like that. When the body is traumatized, it's using aluminum foil and it's using antennas instead of getting itself straight so it can have good reception. And when we unlearn white supremacy mythology and become comfortable in our body, our antenna is straight and we can get a good channel. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And I got that channel. But I'm not the only one who can have it. I'm not the only one that does have it, and we all deserve it. And I'm real clear about that. I'm real clear. I'm not better than nobody else. I'm just a black man who's learned some stuff that I'm willing to share.
Yeah. Dr. Manago, so clearly there's a part 2 that's happening. I will contact your people so that we can make this happen. I will have all of your contact information in the show notes, but just tell our audience, where can they learn more about you if they want to engage in your work and also be able to follow you on social media?
All right. Well, you can find out more about my work on an expansive basis at the Amasi Center for Black Wellness and Culture website. Amasi is spelled A as in apple, M as in Mary, A as in apple, S as in Sam, another S as in Sam, I.org. I'm also connected to the Black Men's Xchange, which is an organization for diverse Black men, and we do the work that is described to you for Black men specifically. Also has a Black Women's Xchange that does the same thing. And also talked already about Wachu Wajua that works with youth. We also have my name, Cleo Manago, which thank goodness is kind of unique. So you put that on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. You'll find me, and please join. Please join me in all these different spaces. And right now I am the CEO of the Pride Center of Maryland in the state of Maryland. I could be found there as well. So I'm doing a lot.
Yes. Can I just say thank you? Literally, thank you for this time and thank you for the invaluable work that you were doing. This is a podcast episode that I know I'm going to go back and listen to time over and time again. It's been one of these kind of conversations, and I love the phrasing of critical thinking and utilizing that, and a lot of self-love and a lot of really understanding that affirmation of Blackness and what it does for us and what it could mean for us is something that I don't take for granted. And I really thank you for coming in and just sharing your knowledge with us.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to be here, and I'm always glad to be able to share what I know is going to be part of the solution for our people.
You can learn more about me by visiting clayswilliams.com. And remember, I'm on all your favorite social media by the handle of @PlanA with Clay. That's @PlanA with Clay. Remember, folks, that Clay's with a K. Thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you in our very next episode of Plan A Conversations. Peace, folks.